All right, let's bring our experts. Well, you're an expert too, Steve.
Not as much as these two people. Are you kidding me?
Let's bring in Bruce first, who's making all the headlines this week. And Bruce, people will say, well, wait, they know you're not a regular. They know we probably talk to you once a quarter or so. I mean, you are not the first person who's going to come out with some attention-grabbing headline, which is why it grabbed all of our attention. So unpack a little. Your team has done great work this week. We've seen them trying to tally up the estimates of, how much tariffs revenue that will raise, how that equals to a tax cut hike or so forth on the consumer. And how do you get to a 60% recession call now?
Well, let me say first that I think as we looked at the data this week, both U.S. and globally, we're looking at an expansion that's still standing on solid ground. What we've been watching as we've gone through this year is a tension between a still healthy expansion and a building macroeconomic shock coming from policy. What we got this week was a very big tax increase on U.S. businesses and households. We would scale it in terms of a roughly 20% rise in tariff rates to basically the highest tax increase we've had in the U.S., if it's going to be fully delivered, that we've had since 1968. So there's a big direct shock here that's coming through in terms of higher tariffs. But I think the bigger story here is we're in the midst of a reassessment of business expectations about what this administration is about. The signals that I think are coming through are challenging where we were coming into the year, where people thought that while this administration would move in extreme ways, it still had a commitment to supporting the business sector and the expansion. I think that's being challenged. So the tax increase, if it's being delivered, is going to be magnified by what we think will be a fairly big hit to business sentiment. On top of that, there are disruptive effects, retaliations, which I won't go into, which also comes into our assessment. We put it together. We're worried that over the course of the next 3 to 6 months, this stuff could build to the point that it breaks the expansion.
Steve, I just want to bring you in here to kind of respond or highlight what you think is important about that.
When I read Bruce's assessment, it was the business sentiment thing that stood out to me. And it sort of counts as a shock, in my opinion. And one of the things I think I pointed out several times on this show is the shock is relative to the expectations for President Trump relative to what we're getting now. Some people put it in terms of we thought there was a Trump put. But Bruce is expanding that, if I'm hearing correctly, saying it's not just the tariffs. It's a whole bunch of things. Like, he doesn't seem to be listening. They don't, and across the spectrum, I'm going to put, this is not what Bruce is saying, but that Bessent doesn't seem to be arguing with him. That Kevin Hassett is not doing a job that we all thought maybe Kevin Hassett would do, which is to say, I guess I'll not mince words, say, Mr. President, this is crazy. You can't do this, right? That's what you would have hoped Kevin might have said to him. Or Bessent. Now, Lutnick, I don't know, because he's seems to be...
But let me rewind for a second.
Go ahead,
this
rewind.
is not going to be a popular take on a day when the Dow is down 1,700 points. But are they all delivering what the president wishes, which is what voters wanted him to do?
But the question is, what is the role of a presidential advisor? Do what the president wishes, or to give him the hard, honest truth? And are they giving it to him? And I think I've said this before as well. It seems like there's a difference between the cadre around the president in the first administration and the cadre in the second.
That's intentional, right? The first administration was viewed as kind of having people who knew Washington but stood in the way of the agenda.
There's a line from Airplane that stood out to me, the spoof. I'm not going to say it. Never mind.
What is it? I don't know.
No, I don't. It was Chump don't want no help, Chump don't get no help.
Okay, I don't know the line.
That was Florence Henderson talking jive on Airplane.
Let's bring in Diane Swank here. Diane, if you could kind of give us your own assessment of where we're going, the business shock. Again, the jobs report this morning, if it weren't for the tariffs, would have told us this economy actually has more momentum or is creating more jobs than anyone would have anticipated, including the shocks that we had up until Wednesday. So I think that complicates things for the Fed, but I'm curious your take.
Well, we actually now have a recession with stagflation, and that's what the Federal Reserve, a mild recession with stagflation. And this is a high watermark in employment. Now, some of the federal jobs that were furloughed actually didn't get counted as furloughed because the judge had said they had to be reinstated and they're paid retroactively. That's been a slow ramp up to get some of those probationary workers back on the payrolls. But we do know the spillover effects are beginning to come out. We've seen warn notices pick up, and we think there will be some employment losses due to the tariffs as well. And so we're looking at, retaliatory environment, how much retaliation you put in. if you take all of the tariffs at face value, because they layer on top of each other, and many people are not really looking at how these do that, if they were to sustain, they would be the highest since the early 1900s, which is really sort of stunning to think about that. And we agree wholeheartedly with this being a very large tax increase on the U.S. economy. But the spillover into inflation is exactly, we're getting at the same thing that Powell was talking about, is you still get a bump in inflation and you have this slower growth, higher inflation, stagflation scenario, which the markets really have not fully sort of accepted yet, because they're looking towards history. While we get weak growth, the Fed cuts. This is not as easy. And as Fed Chairman Powell pointed out today, they're in no hurry and they need more clarity. They need to figure out which is going to be the dominant factor, whether or not they could look through tariffs. You didn't hear him say that today, and I think that's important as well.